The chants hit like thunder, echoing off the walls of Parliament and cutting through the London air with a force that made even the police glance uneasily at the crowd. Traitor! Traitor! The word wasn't whispered in private conversations or muttered on social media. It was shouted by hundreds of voices, sharp, relentless, and impossible to drown out. Keir Starmer tried to keep his pace steady as he stepped from the car and moved toward the gates, but the noise followed him like a curse. This wasn't just political opposition, this was fury unleashed in the heart of Westminster. And for a man who had built his image on control, composure, and authority, the humiliation was complete. The sound of betrayal had been spoken aloud, not just once, but over and over, until it became a rhythm that defined his arrival. Within minutes, the moment was captured, recorded, and broadcast to millions. A leader facing rejection not from rivals in Parliament, but from his own people on the streets. The morning had begun with all the trappings of routine, a schedule packed with speeches, briefings, and tightly planned media appearances. Yet long before Starmer's car pulled into view of Parliament, the streets were already shifting into something far more dangerous. Crowds had begun forming at dawn, carrying banners that painted him as a betrayer of trust, a leader who had abandoned the very base that once carried Labour forward. Their voices rose together, not in hopeful chants or political slogans, but in accusations so direct that even the seasoned reporters on the scene described it as chilling. Traitor, they yelled again and again, until the word was no longer just an insult, it became a verdict. What made the moment truly shocking wasn't just the anger, but the faces behind it. These weren't only hardened political opponents or distant critics. Many of the people in the crowd were once Labour's heart. Working-class supporters, long-time activists, even disillusioned voters who had campaigned in the past. Their presence outside Parliament was more than symbolic. It was devastating. Because in politics, it isn't your enemies that destroy you. It's when your friends, your supporters, your own loyal base turn away. And this wasn't silent withdrawal. This was betrayal returned with betrayal, shouted in public for the whole country to hear. Inside Labour's corridors of power, the unease was immediate. Staffers scrolling through their phones could see the footage spreading in real time. Starmer walking briskly, his jaw set, his eyes fixed ahead, while behind him a sea of protesters surged with fury. Within minutes, clips flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, the sound of traitor reverberating endlessly. Memes appeared almost instantly, framing him as a man cut off from his people, a leader disconnected from reality. Hashtags calling for his resignation began trending, and what should have been another day of careful messaging was now lost to chaos. This wasn't the first time cracks had shown in his leadership. Just weeks earlier, Starmer had been heckled and booed in Southport, his speech drowned out by discontented voices who accused him of abandoning Labour's values. At that time, some within the party brushed it off as a localised outburst, a one-off embarrassment. But now, with hundreds gathering at Parliament itself, the very seat of British democracy, the symbolism could not be ignored. If Southport was a warning shot, Westminster was an explosion. The fury wasn't born overnight. It had been simmering for months, building through a series of decisions that alienated wide swathes of the electorate. His cautious, ambiguous stance on Brexit, never fully embracing it, never fully rejecting it, had left both Leavers and Remainers unsatisfied. His refusal to demand a ceasefire in Gaza, despite growing calls within his own party, was viewed by many grassroots members as a betrayal of Labour's long-standing principles on justice and human rights. And then came the shocking remarks where he appeared to praise elements of Donald Trump's foreign policy, a move that left traditional Labour supporters bewildered, if not furious. All of these moments had weakened him, but what happened outside Parliament transformed discontent into outright rebellion. This was no longer whispers in community halls or angry posts online. This was physical, visible defiance at the gates of power, carried out under the cameras of every major broadcaster in the country. The message could not be softened or spun away. A leader had walked into Parliament with the sound of traitor ringing behind him, and that sound was now echoing across the nation. Even seasoned political analysts, used to the constant churn of scandal and protest, admitted the scene felt different. It wasn't just the noise, it was the intensity, the clarity of the rejection. This was humiliation, broadcast in real time, and the damage was already spiralling beyond control. For Starmer, the danger wasn't only in what had happened, it was in what it represented. A leader on the brink, his base fracturing, his authority questioned in the most public way imaginable. The fallout from the protest outside Parliament did not end when the chants faded into the evening air. In fact, it was only the beginning of a political storm that threatened to consume Keir Starmer's leadership entirely. By the time he had stepped inside the stone halls of Westminster, the noise outside had already turned into headlines splashed across news sites and breaking news tickers. Television broadcasters replayed the footage on loop, every frame dissected for meaning. The tension in his jaw, the quickened steps, the refusal to acknowledge the angry crowd. Commentators didn't even have to exaggerate. The images spoke for themselves. Here was a man not greeted with respect or enthusiasm, but drowned in boos and jeers from the very citizens he once promised to represent. Within hours, the word traitor was no longer just an accusation hurled by a crowd. It had become a national headline. Inside Labour headquarters, the mood was described as grim, even panicked. Staffers who had worked tirelessly to craft a message of competence and stability suddenly found themselves staring at viral clips that undid months of careful planning in a matter of minutes. For a party that was supposed to be presenting itself as the government in waiting, the optics were catastrophic. On MPs' private group chats, the tone shifted sharply. Some warned that Starmer's leadership was now untenable. Others quietly floated alternatives, daring to ask who could replace him if the backlash continued to build. These were not just whispers in the dark corners of politics. They were now becoming open conversations, emboldened by the very public nature of Starmer's humiliation. The timing of the protest could not have been worse. Polls had already been showing cracks in Labour's once commanding lead, with voters expressing unease about Starmer's vague positions on major issues. Many had grown tired of his strategy of trying to please everyone, a strategy that instead left him pleasing no one. Focus groups revealed a dangerous truth. Voters were not merely undecided about him, they were beginning to actively distrust him. They saw a leader who shifted positions depending on the political winds, who spoke of principles but rarely acted on them. For many, the chants of traitor outside Parliament were not just insults, they were confirmations of feelings they already held deep down. It wasn't only about Brexit, though his shifting stance had left scars on both sides of the divide. For Leave voters, Starmer's past as a staunch Remainer was unforgivable. For Remain voters, his refusal to fight for closer ties with Europe was betrayal. And so, in trying to move beyond the debate, he had instead alienated both camps. The same story repeated itself on foreign policy. His refusal to call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza had enraged grassroots Labour members, who had long seen their party as a defender of human rights and justice. At rallies across the country, once loyal supporters turned into angry critics, accusing him of abandoning Labour's moral compass. And then came his comments about Donald Trump, remarks that seemed to suggest admiration for a figure Labour had spent years condemning. To lifelong Labour supporters, this was not pragmatism, it was surrender, a sign that their leader would trade away principles in the hope of broadening his appeal. For the Conservatives, the protest outside Parliament was a gift. Government ministers wasted no time seizing on the footage, framing it as evidence that Labour was not only divided, but fundamentally unfit to govern. At Prime Minister's questions, Tory MPs prepared to weaponise the moment, ready to ridicule Starmer for being rejected by his own supporters. They understood a political truth as old as Westminster itself. Nothing weakens a leader more than the perception that their own side has turned against them. If Starmer could not command loyalty from the people who once put their faith in Labour, how could he ever hope to lead a fractured and weary nation? But the real danger was not what opponents were saying. It was what ordinary people were thinking. In pubs, offices, and online forums, the video of the protest became a conversation starter. Some sympathised with the anger, others simply concluded that Starmer lacked authority. Even those who were not politically engaged could see the optics. This was not a leader celebrated by his people, but one heckled into Parliament under accusations betrayal. In politics, appearances matter as much as reality, and this appearance was devastating. Labour insiders quickly recognised that this was more than just a public relations problem. It was an existential crisis. A protest could have been dismissed as an isolated incident, a noisy minority making headlines, but this was part of a pattern, one that could no longer be denied. First, the boos in Southport, then the criticism over Gaza. Now chants of traitor, outside Parliament itself, each episode stacked upon the last, creating a narrative too powerful to ignore. Keir Starmer was losing his grip on the party, losing the confidence of the public, and losing the trust of those who once believed he could lead them back to power. The anger was not fleeting either. Social media groups began organising follow-up demonstrations, planning to make their presence felt at every public appearance Starmer scheduled. Within hours, petitions calling for him to step down gained traction, attracting signatures from lifelong Labour supporters. The speed with which discontent spread showed just how fragile his support had become. Once momentum shifts against a leader, it rarely stops. Instead, it gathers strength, pulling others into its current. By late evening, political analysts across television panels were unanimous. This was not an ordinary protest. It was humiliation on the grandest stage of all, and its reverberations would be felt for weeks, if not months. The sound of "traitor" had left Westminster's gates, travelling into households across Britain, echoing in headlines, trending on social media, and forcing every voter to ask the same question. If Keir Starmer could not hold together his own base, how could he possibly hope to unite the country? The crisis was no longer theoretical. It was playing out in real time, visible to the entire nation. And as the sun set over Parliament, one thing had become undeniable. The chants outside the gates were not just a protest, they were a warning that the cracks in Starmer's leadership had become fractures, and those fractures were now threatening to tear apart not just his political career, but the very future of the Labour Party itself. As the chants of "traitor" continued to shake the streets outside Parliament, what unfolded next revealed just how fragile Keir Starmer's grip on power has become. The fury of the people wasn't merely about one vote or one speech. It was about years of building distrust, broken promises, and an unmistakable sense that the political chants outside grew louder, even drowning out parts of the debate. The Speaker of the House struggled to keep order. The situation was unprecedented. Rarely has the fury of the public been so physically close to the halls of power. It was not just a political crisis, it was a national spectacle. The anger was so intense that security measures had to be strengthened, with officers forming lines at key entry points and barriers being reinforced. Yet no barricade could contain the symbolic collapse of trust unfolding in real time. For many, the events outside Parliament represented more than just protest. They were a warning, a message that the patience of the British people had run out. This wasn't a demand for reform through quiet petitions, it was a direct confrontation with power, raw and unapologetic. The media frenzy only made matters worse. News networks played split-screen coverage, one side showing the heated debate inside Parliament, the other side showing the furious crowd outside, waving flags, shouting slogans, and holding banners accusing Starmer of treachery. Headlines flashed words like betrayal, collapse, and chaos, further inflaming public sentiment. Commentators from across the political spectrum, even those who had previously defended Starmer, admitted that the situation had spiraled beyond his control. Political analysts warned that once a leader is publicly branded a traitor in such powerful terms, recovery becomes nearly impossible. This was not simply a clash of policy, but a collapse of credibility. Even within his own party, murmurs of a leadership challenge began to spread like wildfire. For the crowd, the anger was deeply personal. Many spoke to journalists, recalling the sacrifices made during the Brexit years, the uncertainty, the economic shifts, the divisions among families and friends, all endured with the belief that their vote would count. To see their decision, their sacrifice, and their patience seemingly tossed aside in secretive backroom dealings with Brussels felt like the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just about politics, it was about dignity. And when dignity is trampled, outrage becomes unstoppable. The chants of "Godsu," "traitor," "Siso" weren't mere insults, they were accusations. Meanwhile, allies desperately tried to shield Starmer from the mounting fallout. Cabinet members issued statements insisting that Labour remained committed to upholding democratic values and that no betrayal had taken place. But their reassurances fell flat, drowned out by the noise outside and dismissed as spin by commentators. Each attempt to calm the situation only highlighted the growing gap between Labour's narrative and the reality seen by the public. As Parliament prepared for another vote that could shape the course of Brexit and Britain's future, the air was heavy with the knowledge that the Prime Minister's authority was slipping. Not gradually, but in freefall. What once seemed like firm ground beneath Starmer's leadership had turned into quicksand. And with each passing hour, he was sinking deeper into political peril. The crisis was no longer confined to Westminster corridors. It had become a movement, a rallying cry carried on the voices of thousands who felt betrayed. As darkness fell over London, the chants outside Parliament did not fade, but grew louder, carrying into the night. Their message was simple, but devastating. The people no longer trusted their leader. For Keir Starmer, the weight of that truth was heavier than any parliamentary defeat. It was the kind of moment that doesn't just damage a political career,